present from Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Board Member Cantor,
Here, Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
and Board Member Stansberry.
Present from Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we'll move on with approval of the agenda. If anyone has any questions, comments, or remarks regarding the agenda, we'll entertain them at this time, or we'll also entertain a recommendation for approval.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
Those in favor? Roll call.
Board Member Fobbs,
Aye.
Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
Board Member Huliza,
Aye.
Board Member Cantor,
Here, yes.
Chair Pietrowski,
Aye.
Board Member Stansberry,
Aye.
and Board Member Thompson.
Yes.
Motion carried for approval of agenda.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the approval of the meeting minutes for our regular meeting of December 15th, 2020. So it will entertain any comments, corrections at this time. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion for approval as of the meeting minutes.
Mr. Chair, I note on page 3 that Commissioner Fobbs was absent, and yet maybe he joined us later in the meeting, but his name appears on the motions subsequently.
Okay, I'll have to double check that. I can't remember. I've had so many meetings, but
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
check.
I can't
I do
recall.
remember he did join late, but he was
Okay.
present.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, and then he also is listed as absent.
Yep,
So-
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple. On page 3, the last, the paragraph that says motion by Commissioner Cantor, it starts that way. Third sentence down, way on the right. It says three cubs. I think that's supposed to be 3 carbs.
hold on, let me find that.
Yeah, I don't want them to repair their cubs.
Oh,
I don't want them to keep
You said-
cubs.
it's on page 3, Bruce, and
Yeah,
where?
page 3.
Mm-hmm.
The last big paragraph,
Mm-hmm.
third line down towards the end on the right.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And then on page 2, I wasn't sure if this was a typo or if there was meaning to this and I wasn't understanding it, but again, the last big paragraph in the middle, all the way to the right, there's it says 6B in there. Was that supposed to be something else? Does not impact the adjacent residential properties, 6B.
I'll take a look at it
Okay.
and let you know. I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I had.
I wonder if
I
that's like,
think it's referring back to the document we were looking at, but I'll have to
Okay.
double check. Yeah.
Thanks.
okay, we can entertain a motion to otherwise approve the meeting minutes with the corrections that have been noted and the follow-up noted.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as noted.
Second.
Okay, those in favor, roll call.
Roll call. Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
Board Member Huliza,
Yes.
Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
and Board Member Fobbs.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, we'll move on to next item on the agenda, which is the public comment. At this time, we entertain comments from the public for items that are not listed on the agenda. If there are any comments or any items to address to the commission, we'd entertain them at this time. I am not hearing any. I don't know if I see any either.
I'm not
So-
seeing any.
Okay, so let's then close that and move on to 6, the election of officers. Beginning of the new year, the Planning Commission entertains motions for, I won't call it a shakeup, but well, opportunities for members of the commission to participate as in maybe greater fashion as members or officers of the commission.
Well, this is Jason. I feel like, Mark, you're doing a great job as the chair, so I would like to make a motion to consider you to continue your role in the chairman of the Planning Commission.
Second.
Okay, those in favor?
Well, do you
Okay,
accept the
roll call.
nomination, Mark?
Yeah, I'll accept the nomination. I'll
Okay.
accept the nomination for another year. Does that make it easier?
Roll call. Board Member Huliza,
Aye.
Board Member Cantor,
Yep.
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes. Get the vote
Board
for
Member
myself.
Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs,
Aye.
and Board Member Hammond.
Yes.
Motion carried. Mr. Pietrowski will remain as the chair.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Well,
There's balloons here. You can't see them, but no.
well, in keeping with that tradition, I don't know if we have to do this individually. I would like to nominate Jason Hammond to remain as the vice chair. Maybe someone else needs to do that for Anna Thompson if they want. Do we have to do that individually, or can I just do
I
a
would rather have them done individually.
individually? Okay,
Mhm.
well, I move that we support Jason Hammond to continue his role as the vice
Second.
chair.
I'll second it.
And I'll accept the nomination.
Okay. Roll call on that one.
Okay. Roll call. Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs,
Aye.
Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
and Board Member Huliza.
Yes.
Motion carried, and Mr. Hammond will remain the vice chair for the Planning Commission.
Okay, we have I'll go ahead and nominate Anna to continue as the secretary, if she's willing to accept.
I'll second it.
I'll accept the nomination.
Okay, we'll do roll call on that.
Roll call. Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Aye.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs,
Aye.
Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
Board Member Huliza,
Yes.
and Board Member Cantor.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay.
Ms. Thompson will remain the Secretary of the Planning Commission.
Congratulations.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, new business. We'll start with the 2020 Planning Commission Annual Report.
Susie, do you want to introduce it? Or do you
Yeah,
want me to jump
sure.
right in?
I'll go for it unless you really want to. So as you can see, we have our 2020 annual report, and all things considered, despite it being a challenging year, we met consistently. Only one of our meetings was canceled due to COVID. The rest of our meetings we met. We had our one and only January meeting in person, and everything else was done via Zoom. And you guys were rock stars at attending and participating and making sure that we had a full quorum for these projects. So we did have 5 site plans that were reviewed by you as a board. These included our nearly completed facade renovations down at Lathrup Plaza. All 3 of the properties owned by JMC, as well as our most recent at the end of the year, the Southfield Life Center. So we did not have any special land uses, but we did do quite a bit of zoning text amendments. Our biggest one is the R1 parking district, I think. Maybe not quite the biggest one. Cannabis will be a big one too. But so we did the R1 parking district public hearing, got some good feedback from you as a board, and that has been forwarded on to council for consideration and adoption at their next meeting. And then, as you know, as with the rest of our meeting tonight, cannabis has been the hot topic for us. So we're on track to get language drafted, finalized, and move forward with whatever process council deems fit. So the other big highlight for us is our comprehensive plan, which is nearly finished. I believe Jill has said that we're hoping for a solid draft plan for you guys to review and release by next month. So, and that I anticipate we will have some additional zoning text changes to make to line our comprehensive plan up with the ordinance. But all in all, I think we had a great year. So there's your annual report. Any questions?
Yeah, I guess a little congratulations to all for keeping business moving for the city.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty impressive, the turnout, the participation. We had very few absences. I think every absence was excused, right? We didn't have anybody that didn't show up unannounced or showed up without letting us know, didn't show up without letting us know ahead of time. Everybody participated, and it was, challenging, everything slowing down, and yet it seems like we still had a pretty good book of business that we needed to deal with, a pretty good number of site plans and some challenging issues that we needed to address. So I feel personally very proud to be part of everything that we've done, and I really appreciate all the teamwork from everybody, through not just the planning commissioners, but also all of the support staff in the city, the support from Giffords Webster. We really are making a great team.
Well said, Jason. Okay.
Second.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the new business.
If I can, just 1 second. I think you want to
Sure.
maybe approve that in the report and then we can forward it on to council.
Okay, if we have to go through the approval process, and we'll entertain a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the annual report.
Second.
Those in favor? Roll call.
Roll call. Board Member Stansberry,
Aye.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs,
Aye.
Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
and Board Member Juliezo,
Aye.
Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Pietrowski.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. Now we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, comprehensive plan, access management plan discussion.
You are able to share if you wanted to share it, Jill.
Wonderful. I will share. But first, a little bit of background. So this conversation is about improvements to the Southfield Road corridor, but also about transportation, mainly vehicular circulation up and down the Southfield Road corridor. Access management is a way of changing up our driveway access and primarily to maintain the flow of traffic, but also to reduce potential conflicts and crashes between cars coming and going from sites, cars driving on Southfield Road, as well as with pedestrians. So you might remember, we've talked about this, but it's been a while since we've covered it. When the Southfield Road project was first discussed with the city in 2008, after your original master plan that identified the Village Center area, at the time that boulevard was big. It was a very wide boulevard, and it was going to push away most of the roadway up to, in a lot of cases, right to the doors of the businesses and properties right along the Southfield Road corridor. And part of our work with the city at the time was about demonstrating to the road commission that a narrower median in certain places would be just as effective at improving the flow of traffic and improving safety in the corridor. And so we did what's called an access management plan. And with that, I'll show you what this is. It's a pretty interesting, here we go. So in this is from 2009, so it's a little bit old, but you can see how the Southfield Road, there's a median that we've prepared in here and then outlined parking and other means of circulation on each property. Part of that was also an identification of potential driveways that could close, then facilitating better traffic flow. So for example, I zoom in a little bit. The idea was that a car could be driving along, could enter, say, can you see if I do this, does that show up? My little mouse moving along?
It does.
Yes.
Does it? Okay, good. So if somebody pulls in here, they can access all of these properties if they need to park, but they can't, we're not coming out every so many feet. So by closing those driveways, cars don't have to stop, or what is often the problem is they don't stop because they don't realize that someone's turning. Oh, they're turning again. Someone else is turning. So it's causing problems in terms of backing up traffic and causing crashes at those conflict points. So the idea was to use the back street or the alleys that were largely developed and in place to facilitate that maneuvering, so that someone could come in, they could use the whole alley to access the properties and then come out at the side streets. You'll see this in a lot of newer developments. A lot of communities have done this from because they've had the luxury of doing it in other later developing suburban communities. They'll say, you come in off of a certain driveway and then you share access to improve the traffic flow. We haven't updated this since 2009, even with the preferred alternative. And that's something that I think should be included as a comprehensive plan strategy for implementation. But the primary reason I wanted to discuss it is because, as you know, we have had several requests from property owners interested in redeveloping, asking if they could license part of the alley. And in some cases, it's been reasonable. I mean, it's not unreasonable at all to ask the question. But then we have some places where the alley isn't developed fully. And you can see that, like if we looked over here, at the time, this property was owned by a security company, and this was part of their scenario, is that they would have just this limited access because of their specific needs. But it wasn't the intent that that alley not be developed. But as you know, we've got some discussion going on about that particular property. And so I thought it would be a good time to talk about the philosophy of maintaining the alleys versus other opportunities to facilitate redevelopment. So is it more important to maintain the traffic flow in the alleys, or is it, and it may be equally as important, to keep that as flex space, knowing that in some cases we could be blocking the alleys altogether, with the idea of allowing property owners to use that alley as parking. So I know it's kind of a big topic, but I just wanted you to see that and then understand some of the issues, because council is being asked from time to time to allow for that. And I think it's up to the Planning Commission to help create and shape that policy. Whether we say we're maintaining the alley, we want to keep it for circulation, or whether it may be appropriate to facilitate redevelopment to modify this plan.
So starting out with a question, Jill.
Mhm.
This plan as it's represented is not something that, I mean, regardless of the layout and the arrangements of parking that are represented here, the alleyways themselves are not it's at a somewhere in between state, and
Right.
really for individual properties.
Right.
And it's interesting for me to see this, and I think pretty much for everyone, because the last time that was really discussed was before any of us were involved with, I think, the Planning Commission here, except for maybe you. It's a concept, I think, that even really hasn't come up for discussion over the years that I've been doing this, which is just about into my 8th right now. So it's an interesting concept, and now your comment about the city council being approached. The city council's been approached from the standpoint of making those alleyways usable for other purposes, more so than it's been to create maybe a more substantial traffic lanes out of it. No, I don't want to say traffic, but access lanes for parking in the back of the buildings. So,
right, those have been requests primarily for parking, and that's been to allow for the redevelopment of certain properties that can't accommodate fully within their lots without significant changes. It's been done, I think, in every situation as a license agreement, so it's not a permanent change. So that opportunity hasn't been given away. But I thought when we got to the point where we were talking about the property where they're considering planting trees, planting vegetation, that may be more of a limitation on development of that alley, especially if they're significant sized trees. And that's something that then changes that interface with the neighboring property. So it's, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
so I just, that seems like a good time to sort of bring this up. And I think it's worth discussing as part of the comprehensive plan too, for some direction.
And I think I'd add to that. I mean, it came to me as you were just speaking here, whether, taking an approach of, and I look at it as giving a little bit more, I want to say, purpose to the alley, maybe a little bit more frequent use to the alleyways in terms of access, what that might do to encourage businesses taking a look at using the adjacent properties for parking in this instance, and what it might do to promote possible redevelopment. And it's just a thought. I'm not saying that it does or it will, but maybe it would. And is that a a positive or a plus to consider in looking at promoting that arrangement? I think I don't know at this point of the game what sort of impact this might have or not have on the plans for Southfield Road, if they're pretty well set. But certainly they were at least having to take into account curb cuts to businesses currently, and maybe that forced some decisions that are desirable from a traffic standpoint and maybe not so desirable from an aesthetic standpoint, or we really didn't go through and analyze the latest plan that we looked at for from a standpoint of safety and whatnot. But I'm sure it was probably registered somehow in terms of the arrangement and the position of the road. Not that we have a chance to change anything, but I'd be curious to know if it would influence anything at this point, or if the road commission would have said, hey, that ship sailed, it's not a factor. Just some thoughts. I don't know if there's credence to that or not, but
yes. And I think part of it too is thinking about the length of some of the medians, the access for people to go opposite directions. If you're able to get to an alley and get to a light, that maybe now that's an easier opportunity for you. Or I know that I have done this if I'm traveling along the Woodward corridor. I visit a business, but I know that the access to turn around is another business over. I might go back down the alley so that I have a better chance to get to that access rather than getting in the road and then going all the way around. And that was another part of the intent of this, was to say that, it's going to be different for people to get around in the corridor, recognizing that there's turnarounds now, or, will be in the future, that people don't have to deal with now. And how do they manage that? And being able to use that alley system to kind of function as that release for some of that inconvenience for people.
Or to maybe mitigate disruption of the decision making. I mean, with the different information that has to register for a driver and I think pedestrians as well, in terms of where is traffic coming from if I'm trying to use a new crosswalk. Is it strictly the roadway, or do I have to be cognizant of more frequent curb cuts to businesses versus say maybe if those are off of the residential roads, which it looked like the sketch you had up was taking advantage or using the roads in that fashion, as opposed to necessarily saying here's a drive from a piece of property. And I'm sure the business owners themselves would certainly possibly prefer that in terms of positioning, or there might be an advantage to them having more frontage, less having to account for an entry drive. But that's something that really almost requires some study, I think, in terms of how the lots might be utilized. I think the example we had in terms of accommodating parking on adjacent properties really already started to address that, and it seemed to do it by by the entryways off of the entryways to the neighborhood. So it's just something to think about.
Jill,
Mhm.
in the drawing that you had, I know it's from some time ago,
Yeah.
but if you utilize the alleys, if we start to utilize the alleys as drive-throughs for the businesses, how are we going to accommodate the people in the neighborhoods where their street comes out there? Because you really won't see all this traffic going crossways. I'm fortunate our street's blocked off, so we won't have an issue. But all the streets that cross those alleys where you're trying to get them out to a main corner,
Mhm.
are we gonna look at maybe shutting some of those down so that it's limited access to cut through the neighborhoods now?
I don't think that's something that we had considered. It's as inconvenient for the residents as anybody else to have those closed. Um, the advantage of the alley network is that it's extremely slow travel. So when someone's coming out of an alley access, they're coming at a much, much slower speed than they would be if they were actually on Southfield Road. So people would have to watch, but they would have the right of way on the residential street. So it's similar in that way, and possibly easier for those vehicles to get out once they're on a street rather than trying to exit from a driveway, where someone else is trying to exit from a driveway that's within 100 feet or less.
But it wouldn't stop the cut through the neighborhood if you really just want to cut through.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, you are fortunate that your neighborhoods are quite confusing. So with all of the curved streets that go in different directions. So I think probably most of the people who are driving through are residents and live in those neighborhoods until you really know your way around. And that's a good release valve for Southfield Road congestion and traffic.
In the last plan that we saw recently about the Southfield Road update,
Mhm.
are all of the drives still closed off like in the old
No,
plan?
no,
So
they haven't
it's
gotten
not
to
as
that.
bad as it started out.
Right. They haven't gotten into that level of detail, I don't think, with the curb cuts, but that's something that we want to look at.
Okay. Thank you.
There are other thoughts, comments on that strategy? I mean, one thing that occurred to me, I'll speak first, was is that if we take an approach where the alleyways become more of a, I want to say, secondary travel, and I'll say secondary travel only from the standpoint of if something happened on Southfield Road, and granted, the strategy from the Road Commission is to move traffic along
Mhm.
more steadily. Let's hope not necessarily at a really fast clip, but more steadily anyway.
Mhm.
Would possibly be the likelihood of, if it got backed up, would people then have this as a more, useful thoroughfare,
Mhm.
for good or bad? Because they don't have the interruptions that they do now. Certainly with the alleyways are there, but properties are they don't necessarily flow from property to property currently.
Mhm.
Just another thought of a
Right.
potential
And
issue.
public safety as well, having good access around certain areas.
This is Will. I guess my question was actually the repair of those alleys.
Mhm.
I know that we were looking from, obviously doing studies within the neighborhoods, but I'm looking at ongoing costs and future costs associated with more traffic on those alleys and what that effect would be on residents, both short and, midterm. That's kind of my thought.
Yes, that's a great question. And I think that's the other part of why I wanted to bring it up, because I know that some of those alleys are in need of repair. And if we were going to maintain the alley system, then it would be a good investment. Likely the DDA would be doing it. The DDA did some alley improvements probably 4 or 5 years ago.
at least, probably closer to like the 5, 6
I think
years ago.
so.
But
Yeah.
and that is something that the DDA has discussed over the course of the last few months. Actually, is and we've talked with our engineer over at Giffords as well. We'd like to do a condition assessment of the alleys. I mean, obviously we can all look at them and say, oh yeah, those alleys need the TLC. But really to do something similar to what Bruce and the infrastructure committee have done, which is to really assess the conditions of the alleys and rate them in a similar way, so that we can really figure out how much do we need to invest annually to maintain them, and then what else needs to be done to for a more permanent fix and solution, and not just dropping some cold patch in there.
Yeah,
Right,
my guess, just knowing what I know from my infrastructure work, is you're probably talking about $2 million for to get the alleys back into drivable condition.
Yeah, Ringler had provided me some preliminary numbers, and it certainly wasn't going to be a cheap fix. So
Would
Right.
the
And that's part of the thought behind this too, is that a good investment? Like, are we doing this for just specific businesses to use the alley behind their businesses? Or are we doing this because it's part of the city's comprehensive transportation network? Because I think the second question provides more justification for creating some kind of an investment program into that. And the level to which you do invest based on what we've envisioned for those to be. Or the complete other end of the spectrum, do they all get vacated and then they become shared with the other property owners and gives everybody a little bit more room to breathe?
And that was kind of my two-part on that one, was looking at the roads and then understanding what value does that actually provide to those business owners. Like when I think about Panera, they have the back entrance door. Well, now having an alley, another access point, could be the backside of those buildings now becomes much more valuable because
Right.
I actually have more traffic. And trying to quantify that, put myself in a business owner's shoes, I don't know which one's actually going to make the most sense. Obviously, from a zoning perspective is what we're talking about, but also we're talking about strategic planning down the road, even more so, because to your point, there's an investment associated with this and a maintenance cost associated with this, which could actually be an incentive if I was a business owner, knowing that I can actually use that storefront, whether it was a restaurant and I could actually put something in the back, or I can actually have a better entrance, or I don't have to deal with as many entrances, or storefronts can now be moved forward. I mean, I'd want to know, I guess, from a business owner perspective, how they even see this, because that would actually probably impact from a strategy and strategic standpoint, removing zoning from this. I'm looking at this right now from a strategic standpoint for Lathrup Village, as opposed to what does that mean for the zoning and costs and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that taps into something that I was thinking as well, which is the backs of buildings and the buildings on alleys can be undertreated or minimally treated, and they can collect, I mean, by necessity in some cases, certainly that's where the utilities are, that's where the service end of things is. But if it becomes the public, then there has to be another, or maybe it doesn't have to be, but it might encourage business owners to take another look at what the engagement with their customers is at that point, which might mean an opportunity to improve the rear of the building, or what has traditionally been the rear of the building. It may just require or promote a different thinking in terms of what is the pathway from the parking lot to the entry. Is it Not necessarily that it has to be at the back, but ideally it should be pedestrian friendly and attractive. And I think we, as the Planning Commission, would all support, maintaining the beautification of any developments that occur, both for people outside and for the residents. Getting into a little bit back into the engineering side of things. Jill, I don't know if you can speak to this from Giffords Webster, if we need to pull in the engineers. Is the alleyways right now, what standard are they built to? Are we talking about, I mean, if we were pursuing this, I would think there's heavier traffic in the alleys. I imagine alleys should have a standard to them because of, heavier trucks, whether it's for trash pickup or for deliveries that are accommodated. But the more frequent traffic might, recommend a, concrete versus asphalt, and that gets into costs as well. Maybe Bruce, I don't know if this, if you have a perspective on this, or if this was even part of your infrastructure, focusing primarily on roads. If you have anything you can add on that.
It was not. We didn't really talk much about we talked a very small amount about it with engineer Scott, but I mean, just the only thing I can add to what you just said is that the concrete roads are about 200,000. If I remember correctly, about $200,000 more per mile.
Yeah, I've got a note from Scott that these are 2015 numbers, but when we did the alley work before, so it was 2016-15 is when we did the alley work. It was $163 per lineal foot to pave in asphalt, and then it was $210 per linear foot to do it all in concrete. So
I think either way, the standard is still the road standard.
Yeah,
I would suspect it's more of a road standard even as it is. I just wasn't sure. They may not certainly receive as much attention as a road would. And they might not receive as much traffic because of that condition, or because of just the broken up layout. But if it encourages more traffic, then you've got more wear and tear. And so it's just something that would be considered as part of, if we were going to look at, I guess, substantiating and more in reinforcing, and I don't mean in an engineering sense, but the use of that infrastructure for the alleyways as more of an access to our businesses, more so than it is necessarily now. That's just something that need to be considered. So as a point of discussion at this point, there's nothing we have to necessarily approve today. It's just information to take forward and for the commission to consider as part of the planning process.
Yes, and I think it's worth conveying some of this conversation to City Council as they consider other applications for licensing use of the alley. What kinds of uses are appropriate, and what we might want to give some extra thought to.
Hey Scott, what's the I'm trying to remember what's the severability of our license agreements? We can end it at any time, right? With just a little bit of notice.
Yeah, I want to say it's 30 days written notice. I could check real quick. Yeah. But yeah, the city does have the ability to, and it's part of the licensing agreement that the licensee has to return the alley to the condition that it was before. So if they made any improvements or put any structures, plantings, or anything like that, they would be required to remove those upon termination of the license.
I think it'll be beneficial to, I guess, get a good handle on what we think are the pros and cons of either approach. And so we can make a decision whether this is something that we would recommend to comprehensively, improve and maintain the alleys with a, I guess, a structured approach, as opposed to, I guess, leaving it more like we have now, which is we still want to encourage that the alleyways are maintained, but if there's more advantage or more flexibility for businesses to maintain that as an alley, or to be able to use it for parking, or not necessarily maintain it as an alley.
Mark, one of the things I was thinking too is probably the flexibility for future planning. Because if I was a business owner and I had a license, and then I found out that I was going to be on the hook to actually, even though I read the contract, but if the future plan has the possibility from a risk reward standpoint for me as a business owner, I'd kind of want to know. So I think the city needs some flexibility, so that if we want to move that way, we can, without incurring too much downstream effects to business owners themselves, just kind of moving forward, because I'm assuming that we want to have different options on the table independent of what's decided. Probably what the flexibility is going to be good for us future forward is kind of what I'm thinking.
Right. And it's hard to take a blanketed approach, unless there's a really strong reason to do. And when I'm saying that, I'm saying it in terms of the perspective of, let's reinforce the alley. Let's make sure that we have, we're steering more traffic and entering our businesses, at least vehicularly, in that fashion. But it's also, tied to safety on Southfield Road, and what benefits there might be there too. So I'm not convinced one way or the other at this point. And that's a good point. Those are all good points that you made. So if there's nothing more for us to talk about on that, if no one else has anything to share, we can entertain moving on to zoning amendments, primary caregiver facility discussion.
Okay.
I think we're ready to do so.
All right. I'm just zipping to that part of my agenda. Okay. Oops. There we go. I'm having a weird thing where my PDF would not go backwards. Okay, now we're backwards. All right. So as the Planning Commission will recall, we've had some discussion about permitting cannabis facilities as licensed by the state of Michigan in the city at the direction of City Council. But one of the things that we hadn't really considered as fully as those other items are the licensed primary caregivers. So right now the ordinance is silent on that use, and thought it would be very helpful to clarify where in the city primary caregivers are permitted, and further where they're not permitted. As you saw, if you read the background memo, there was a court case last year, the Michigan Supreme Court, DeRuyter versus Township of Byron, where the court sided with the ability of the local government to provide reasonable locations in the community for their use. That has been embraced by many communities in the state, who recognize that as many had been allowing these to be in homes, that there's some serious detrimental impacts to the neighborhoods as a result of those in many places, not every one and not in every place, but many are, can be problematic. And so many communities are adapting refining their zoning ordinances to provide for these locations outside of residential districts. And so we have present some language for your review. We'd like to move this along fairly quickly. And I don't know if Scott, if you want to add anything at this point.
Yeah, just real quick. Just to clarify, because I know there's a lot of confusion when talking about cannabis businesses and what is a caregiver facility. So this goes back to the original 2008 ballot initiative language that what has become a largely or had become a largely unregulated area. The state would issue caregivers licenses to individuals upon submission of proof that they had qualified patients under their care, and then those individuals were allowed to grow up to 12 plants per patient with a maximum of 5 patients and themselves for a total of 72 plants. So this is different from the Medical Marijuana Act, Licensing Act for dispensaries and it's also different from the recreational ordinance that recreational act that allows for recreational dispensaries. So whereas the city has by default for the medical marijuana facilities, by default cities were opted out unless they elected to opt in, which is what Lathrup Village chose to do. And then with respect to recreational facilities, cities were required to affirmatively opt out, or by default they would be opted in, which is why the city has the current prohibition against it with the sunset provision. So just so we're clear that this particular language that you're looking at tonight does not apply directly to either the recreational or the medical facilities that predominantly is what people think of and when they think of cannabis businesses. But this goes back, like I said, to the 2008 ballot language. So.
Quick question. In the memo under the background on issue section, the second paragraph and the last the second to last line of that paragraph says, this is left little in the way of these operations, which may have up to 12 customer patients. But it's also stated in here, and Scott, you just reiterated that the law actually only allows for 5 customer patients plus the caregiver.
That's a typo, and I resent it, but it didn't get out. It should have said 12 plants per patient.
12 plants per patient.
I'm not sure
Okay.
why that, yeah, but.
Okay, I just wanted to make clear on that.
Yes,
that
no, you're right,
helps.
and I'm sorry that was confusing.
Because one of the things I was thinking was, well, if we have ordinance language that limits the number of patients below what the state allows for, is that legal or not? And if it is legal, then do we want to consider that might be a good way to do that as well?
Yeah.
But my opinion on all of this, after reading this and hearing what you just had to say, Jill, and also, Scott, the background and the history that you provided, is that this is the only mechanism, maybe even the best mechanism that we have to actually have some oversight and control over how medical marijuana caregivers operate inside the city, right? So in the absence of this, it's kind of free reign, right? Anybody can set up a grow facility in their house and provide and get licensed by the state, and right, and we wouldn't really have any mechanism to prevent that from happening in areas where we don't want to close to other things, like is noted in the buffer diagram.
And it's also too, in fairness to the applicants that assuming the city moves forward with the recreational ordinance, the standards and that the applicants are going to have to adhere to, the amount of information they're going to have to provide, and the investment in the properties that they're going to have to make in order to obtain these licenses are going to be significant. And so in fairness to them, we believe that it's appropriate to have some of the same standards in place for those caregivers, so that there is equality, and we're not asking these applicants, these recreational and medical applicants, to provide us with all this stuff, but at the same time we're letting largely unregulated area of the market go without any sort of restriction, because I may have said they get licensed by the state, but it's just a registry. There is no license for caregivers under this provision. So it's just a registry.
They fill out a form. You get
so they don't have to report to the city that they've got approval.
Like Jill indicated, there currently is no ordinances addressing this. So there's no reporting to the city. I mean, yes, they would be required to obtain a business license. But other than that, there's no reporting to the city, and then there's no oversight from the state. There's not, it's not like Lara is sending in someone to make sure they're compliant with the requirements of the ordinance. So largely the enforcement falls on the city or the local unit of government, which oftentimes doesn't even know that these facilities exist. So because they're not provided with any feedback from the state with respect to the number, the location, the identity of the facilities operating that may be operating within their community.
So how would we know? I mean, if we go ahead and we pass the ordinance, which identifies or controls where these facilities may operate, there's that doesn't do anything for those who are already operating other than making them out of compliance, but we don't know that they're doing it. So if they're in the neighborhood, unless something comes up or they get reported and there's some way of identifying that it's happening, it's going to continue to just function in that manner. Is that more or less true?
Partly, yes. I mean, we do have, the city does have the ability, and we do have, there are narcotic enforcement divisions throughout Oakland County that have identified potential facilities that are operating. And you're right. As far as we know, nobody has pulled any permits for any improvements or requested any business licenses for these types of facilities currently in our city, which would mean that they are operating illegally and contrary to our ordinance. So
unusually high water bills.
Yeah, high water, high electrical bills, things of that nature. So those are all enforcement mechanisms that the city could look to. And again, once this language, hopefully this language gets adopted and put in place, and then the city could, because they're not lawfully operated businesses, they wouldn't achieve that legal non-conforming status and be grandfathered in to their current location. So the city could require them to adhere to these standards, and again, try to level that playing field with potential future businesses that we're going to require significant investment in their property. So,
right.
Hey Jill, under draft language, it's number 1. The city's office district is primarily along 12 Mile Road.
Yes.
Why is that? Those would be the proposed area, or I wanted to understand that.
Right. So if you looked at the on the second page of the memo, primarily the idea is that these were going to be very low traffic establishments, that they were not going to be the kinds of places that you would necessarily see along Southfield Road. Even though we have offices on Southfield Road, we also have other retail and restaurant uses. So there's a lot more traffic. Keeping those areas open to encourage that type of use. So keeping them back on the office district where they may not have as much traffic there. Does that make sense? I feel like I explained that right.
You're trying to say that essentially it might be better suited because where we're trying to, well, by nature of Southfield Road has the traffic. This is appealing to businesses who want that traffic and that flow, as opposed to.
Yeah, the primary caregivers don't need the traffic because they don't have people coming, just dropping in to their establishments. They have, they're very limited in their number of people that they can really serve. And so they don't need to be on Southfield Road, and keep those Southfield Road properties open and available for those users who do need that kind of activity. That's the kind of activity that we want to see on Southfield Road, people coming and going, and not the shops that nobody goes in and out of, really. Does that make sense? Does that more clear the second time?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
All right.
In the memo, the last paragraph under the draft language, paragraph 4, says, as part of the city's overall cannabis provisions, this amendment requires that a future caregiver operates locate outside of residential areas. I think that There's probably a typo in there too.
It's like locations.
What are we
locations
trying to
outside-
say here?
Operates outside or
Outside
at
of
locations
residential-
outside of residential areas.
Yeah, not outside in the backyard, but out of the residential areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
So you're
Yep.
trying to get future caregivers to operate their caregiver businesses, not
In
in the residential
non-residential
areas,
areas,
but
yes.
actually in office buildings.
Yeah.
And then the last sentence reiterates the point that you were just making, which is that we're essentially saying, okay, if you happen to have a caregiver business running today, before the language is in place, you're non-conforming legally. But after that date, then you have to comply with all the ordinance, which I think it makes sense. Scott made the point about fairness and consistency, and I think that's right. It also makes it really clear to people who want to operate caregiver businesses in the city what we expect of them, so it's not a big guessing game on their part. And I think there's a big value to them just knowing what is required of them to operate a business like that here in Lathrup Village.
I have a question and a comment on the draft ordinance language. On page 4, down at the bottom, section G, on odor. It says no odor from the operation. So that odor from the operation is not discernible beyond property lines of the zoning lot. Seems to me that needs to be a lot more restrictive, especially given the fact that if they're going to be in an office building, they're going to be sharing that building with other tenants. And if they're allowed to have the odor to the edge of the property, well, that kind of impedes the ability of the other businesses to, be unencumbered with that odor. So.
But what kind of odors are you concerned about, Bruce? Because the language also says you can't use cannabis in these facilities.
Right. Well, I'm just saying that, the ordinance is saying you can have an odor out to the property line, but it really shouldn't. It should be contained within their building if there is any odor.
There is an odor associated with the growing of the product.
Yeah, and I'd be curious. I was curious on that myself, because it's whether in the context of this or the other facilities that we are considering and talking about. I didn't really, you think about odor maybe associated with cannabis being, burned for smoking purposes or whatever. I can say I was out on a hike and I found a vial, empty, mostly empty, from cannabis, and I opened it up and powerfully strong. I haven't had contact with it before, but I thought there was an odor, and it was a strong odor. Granted, it was contained. So I don't. Beyond that, I didn't have a perspective on what the growing of the plants, odor-wise might be like. So.
And I'll add to that, Jason. There is, if we saw it, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, there was, I think it was an article in the Free Press, maybe, and then also a spot on one of the local news channels about an issue in West Bloomfield they're having with these grow facilities where the odor of it's not the odor of burnt marijuana, it's the unburnt, the growing plants, that it's overtaking the neighborhood. So that is a big complaint. One of the, especially in the residential neighborhoods where the people that, largely the people that run these facilities aren't living there. So they're not dealing with it, but the neighbors are. And that's primarily why this language is in here. And I agree, Bruce. I think maybe we kind of oversight on our part. We missed that. But limiting it to that individual suite in the office, really, because you don't want the other tenants in the building, if they're not in the same line of work, to have to deal with that. So
yeah, I agree with that. That totally makes sense.
That to say prohibit odor outside of the establishment. Does that make it clear that your establishment is within the walls of your office?
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and then my question, and I need a little bit of clarification on what I don't understand. In section H, right below that, the last sentence says a qualifying patient shall not visit, come to, or be present at the parcel where medical cannabis is cultivated to purchase, smoke, consume, obtain, or receive possession of any cannabis. So that I'm a little confused on that. If they're, acting as a caregiver, aren't they providing that cannabis to the 5 patients that they
They
grow
are,
for?
they
So,
would have to take it to them.
okay, so it's not like there's no
not a
transactions that
pharmacy.
take place there. They'll grow it there, but they have to actually take it to their patients.
Right.
Okay. And is that in the MMM, whatever the other last letter is, L?
The MMMA,
MMA?
it doesn't speak to it.
Or do we need, oh, so I guess that's specifically, that's what we're saying it.
Right.
Got it. Never mind. I'm
Yeah.
good.
That makes sense. Yeah, I support all that as well. I think we need to restrict the odor more closely, and that language sounds right.
We did have a question on letter E, for secure facilities. The second item, this is restricting, making sure that any facility, including a vehicle, would be secured. And we added in that an individual can't be in the vehicle unless they're either the registered qualifying patient or the caregiver. And the question was, well, for prohibiting people from coming to the site to pick up their cannabis, do we need to have this in here? I kind of went back and forth on it. I left it in because I just wanted to be extra clear. We might not need it, and I'll defer to Scott on what he thinks, if we should just leave it in, or if it seems redundant, we can take it out.
No, I think it's okay to leave it in. What Jill's saying is that there are some individuals that will utilize a vehicle as the secure facility. So this kind of covers both, although unlikely, it does cover that what if scenario. So I don't have a problem.
The only thing I could imagine, and it might be confusing, a little bit confusing to me as well. If we're saying that you can't come to the facility to get product distributed to you, but you can use a vehicle as a secure locked facility for storage of the product, like, aren't those two things potentially contradictory if the person who's operating the vehicle is the patient?
Well, I think actually it's in the act itself, so I don't know that we want to remove it. Now that I'm just rethinking that again. I remember seeing that earlier.
I was going to say, this is trying to enforce the same criteria that we use for, quote, the facility being the business, the building, for the vehicle as well, at least within what we're able to, while the vehicle's on site. I mean, certainly we can't regulate what happens off-site in terms of someone having access when they go to make a delivery if it's used for that purpose.
And that's wouldn't be in the purview of the zoning ordinance anyways, because we're more focused on what happens at the facility, at the location, whether it be inside the building or if the vehicle, like I said, it could be grown, cultivated, and then stored in a van until delivery time. And so we're going to want to ensure that vehicle adheres to the same standards.
Scott, while we're discussing, we were talking about the odor from growing marijuana. I guess I had a question about the humidity levels, because obviously some places have reported high levels of mold, just given the humidity that comes with growing, whether intense or whatever the function is, how they're growing. Do we speak to that, or is there actually thought about how that is regulated? Because obviously if I'm a business owner in that same building, I don't want mold growing throughout the building, office space. It's just something I didn't know if we were even thinking down that road or not. Just knowing indoor growing in general has that opportunity for mold growth to happen, just given the high humidity levels.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's something that I don't think we really, I guess you could tell that neither Jill nor I grow our own marijuana.
There's a standard for
I'm learning a lot, though.
Not for marijuana specifically, but if I can say that none of our commercial buildings, I can say pretty confidently without even having seen them, but just knowing that they're not designed for high levels of humidification. they
Mhm.
would be at risk without significant efforts being made to contain humidity. Most exterior walls on businesses or the buildings that we would have likely would not, depending on what that humidity level is. And in that humidity level, I mean, we start designing specifically once the humidity level hits like 30%, 35%.
Yeah, we're talking 60%. I mean, humidity.
Yeah, you're talking more. Yeah, you're up in the pool museum or museum. You're above museum level,
Yeah,
which is usually
exactly.
around 50%.
And I
So-
can speak to this because we, in Battle Creek, I do community development work out there, and we just bought a warehouse to grow collard greens and, vegetables for that community that has a problem with food scarcity. And so when we had the engineers come in, I had to actually look at what are we going to need to do in terms of humidity? What are those humidity levels at? How are we controlling said humidity? Just because we wanted to make sure that the building didn't actually slowly deteriorate.
Mhm.
But now that we're in an office space, I can imagine a next door, suite mate having some questions.
Right. Yep. I think there would be criteria for the building itself if they were going to try to when you think about this, if somebody was conducting this in a residence, we can only imagine what it would do in a residential situation in terms of
Yep.
deterioration of a structure over time, depending on
Just
how
something to
they
think
chose
about.
to operate it in that fashion. So yeah, I think that speaks to having this, contained in a commercial setting as being advisable. So
Especially
I
when
don't,
we're sharing. It'd be one thing if it was someone and they had their building, they're eating the cost of said building deteriorating. But now that we're sharing, or the possibility of sharing, just something to think about when we're looking at from a more of an engineering zoning standpoint.
Right. And we did have a light hand to it on the N under zoning review application requirements under A that's talking about building improvements, where I think the building official would be looking at those things, knowing what the use is, making sure that the ventilation is adequate. We had in the other language, if you remember, a little bit more descriptive language about not creating a situation where the building is going to deteriorate, not impeding the future use of a building for other purposes in the future, and having additional ventilation plan for additional ventilation and maintenance of the property. But I wanted to be consistent between this and that language, but I didn't want to be overly heavy on the text here, but we can move copy that over without a problem.
Yeah, I'm just trying to dot the i's, Joe. Just thinking out loud as we're brainstorming.
Yeah, no, I like it.
Right, and I'm doing the same here, just trying to make sure that if something is established, that it's, if there's a way for us to regulate the correct way to do it without, if it's an owner who chooses to occupy, set up a business, does it in a manner that deteriorates the structure, I guess that's their own business, but we don't certainly don't want that becoming a liability for the city in any way.
I have two things. One is there's a comment that Dr. Theriot put in the chat, which is a good question, relative to the use of a vehicle as a locked storage facility. Could potentially each parking space become a facility occupied by a vehicle that's used as a storage facility?
There is a minimum square footage requirement in the ordinance, so that would eliminate that from developing into I can envision a bunch of ship containers.
So then I think that's a dichotomy too. There's this minimum square footage for the facility, but then we're also saying for the purposes of, what's the language say?
Yeah, no, it's temporary. It's the vehicle can only be used for temporarily transporting it.
Temporarily
You can't
transport
just
cannabis,
store it
yeah.
there and leave it there. It's like, oh no, I'm just storing it in this car that I'm parking on site every day.
Yep. Okay.
How about robust outbuildings in the storage that we just went through? Not that any of those storage units were in any manner considered robust or secure in the manner that they would need to be for this.
Yeah, still not the right square footage, right?
Right,
Too
and
small.
the language says it shall be secured in a main building.
Yep.
So it's not intended.
I think
that
we're
there's
good there.
Any kind of accessory structure at all.
Relative to the humidity question, so I know that there is language in here that says inspections can be performed and
Right.
consistent with other parts of the ordinance that require inspections. Is there anything in the ordinances that have to do with inspections relative to humidity levels?
I would say it's probably part of the building code.
And with that, I guess
standards.
We might
for
want to
air
go back and
handling.
take a. We might want to go back and take a look at it and make sure that
We'll make sure we address it.
Yeah, if we need to adjust it either up
Yeah.
or down relative to support the humidity requirements of growing those plants without just to pile on what Will was just talking about, potentially having humidity so high that it damages the building.
Yeah, I think we can address that.
Yeah,
Maybe
no
expand the odor, humidity, and pest section. Some requirements for those.
Other than that, I mean, I think that this is a great idea to include this type of language in our ordinance. It's going to solve a lot of problems or avoid a lot of problems, not just for the city, but also for potential caregivers as well as potential retail uses in the future. And having that consistency is a great idea.
Yeah, and definitely it's something that we want to be in front of before we have any issues related to it.
Right. So the idea was that we would set a public hearing for what date?
February 8th at 6 p.m. But before we go too far, it looks like Cheryl's got her hand up, maybe wants to say something. Is that?
Yes,
sure.
If I could, in regards to the vehicles, looking at E, it says the locked facility includes a motor vehicle. So that's already declaring that a locked facility is and can be a vehicle. Is there anything preventing one establishment from having 12 vehicles associated with their business in that parking lot?
They can have 12 vehicles associated with their business if they can park them on the site, but they cannot be considered to be their enclosed lock facility on a permanent basis. Because the 2 points following that statement that you read are the qualifiers, which is that one, it's being used as temporarily to move it from the cannabis from one location to another, or move it to another facility completely, or that it's a caregiver or a patient. They just happen to be there. That's the only time that can be used that way, because if you previously in that same statement, it says that all medical cannabis shall be contained within the main building. So no, they can't park 12 cars and say that's our secured facility.
Okay, we also have a question from one of our attendees. It says, does the ordinance specify the zoning classification caregivers are allowed to operate in commercial, mixed use, etc.? The map shows all outside of the buffers. So
Ordinance specify the zoning. Yeah, well, that's part of the text is yes, the office.
Right. So
yeah, section 3. Article 3, section 3.16B is the office district.
Only office district.
And
so
these are presented as being a permitted use. So this is different than what we talked about with the others as special land uses due to the limited location and the similarity between the parcels that are already designated as office. It doesn't seem like it's necessary to also have these be special land uses, because special land use, as you remember, would be for things that would generally be permitted in a district, but due to a parcel's specific location, there could be factors that would prohibit or limit its use there. These are pretty much all the same. They're very similarly located. They're similarly sized. So the idea was just let them be permitted uses. They have to follow all of those standards that are associated with it, and they'll have to have site plan review.
Thank you.
So
Totally
if
makes
I
sense.
heard that correctly, then you said we're limited to the office district, which is strictly at 12 Mile Road.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the packet and the proposed language, this is on the second page, right at the
Yep.
top, where it says Part 2, amend Article 3 to allow primary givers as permitted, adding item 316B11, right? Which is
Correct.
adding that to the list of approved uses for the office district, which is got noted as section 316B.
And we have another question about the caregiver. Shouldn't the caregiver ordinance be folded into the overall ordinance? I presume they mean overall cannabis ordinance. Scott,
That was
how would you like to answer that?
The answer to that is no, because as I mentioned previously, by default, for medical marijuana ordinances, by default, the city is opted out unless they elect to opt in. With respect to recreational ordinance, by default, the city's opted in unless they've elected to opt out, which currently they have. So those two areas will be addressed based on or dependent upon the will of city council at a future date. This area is currently unregulated and it's not an opt-in or opt-out type scenario. So the city needs to address this. There's no sense waiting to include this as legislation or ordinances that may or may not be adopted by city council. So this is something that needs to be addressed separately.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so at this point, with this level of discussion, we are then, I guess, ruling on this to advance it to city council?
We are going to,
or
we need to set a public hearing date, which that is, I guess, technically the next item.
So we need to set a public hearing date, but there also is some more work that needs to be done on this language.
Right. We are going to address a little bit more clearly odor, the humidity and interior impacts of the use, and pests, I believe.
Yep.
But we can, that's not a problem. We can do that.
Is there anything else that we need to do to, I guess, close out this item on the agenda today to make it accessible for the public hearing?
Do we need a motion?
I mean,
forward it to
a
council,
motion,
or is that going to be covered?
Yeah,
under
we're looking for a motion to approve the language as presented plus language we haven't seen yet?
No, so the motion is to direct the clerk to publish the notice of public hearing for February 8th. A draft language will be available. Those changes will be implemented and provided to the clerk, and those will be available.
So that's what we need right now then. Just a motion to establish the public hearing, and the draft will be made available for that discussion or that.
Yeah, so I'll make a motion to set a public hearing date. I think Susie, you said was for February 8th. That's what we're targeting.
6 p.m. Yep, February 8th
6
at 6 p.m.
For public comment and public hearing on this ordinance change.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, roll call.
Roll call. Board Member Thompson.
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs.
Aye.
Board Member Hammond.
Yes.
Board Member Hulieza.
Yes.
Board Member Cantor.
Yes.
Chair Pietrowski.
Yes.
And Board Member Stansberry.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is cannabis discussion, feedback on the draft language.
And we didn't include it again in your packet. We just wanted to remind you that we did get some feedback, but we haven't heard from everybody. So we just wanted to make sure if you did have additional comments that you'd please share those with Susie and she'll forward them on to us.
Okay. If there's no need, or if there's no other discussion, anyone wants to hold on that, then we will close new business and move on to old business, of which there is none. So let's just move right on to other matters for discussion.
Just a comment. After kind of talking just a couple of community members in the neighborhood, I think there may be some confusion about what the ordinance represents, just from an understanding standpoint. Obviously, we're getting ahead of it, and we kind of are in the know. And I think that there's just community members that really have no idea what this means,
what this is about.
Just from a scope standpoint, understanding, okay, people are growing in the neighborhoods. People are concerned, well, what is this going to do to my value? I've heard that. And I don't know if even in public comment, well, what I'm hoping doesn't happen, but it's maybe possibly likely, is that a lot of people are going to have preconceived notions because just the understanding behind what we're actually talking about in that draft language. Yeah, I mean, it can be kind of convoluted. It's not simplified. If I was a layman and I got this, I would wonder what in the world are we doing in Lathrup Village, right, wrong, or indifferent? Because it's how do I say? Even given our discussion that we had, and we have the documents and whatnot, I think that there's a lot of people that may be confused because there's so many different things that are moving when it comes to cannabis. And so that's just my thought, just what I've heard anecdotally from just a couple of community members near my house.
So you have a suggestion on how to address those concerns?
It's one of those things where basically what we're trying to do is set up zoning ahead of what is possible, and also try to add some structure to this. I don't know how you communicate that without causing false positives and people getting even, to have even more comment that could be misconstrued.
I guess, I would, if somebody approached me about ordinances relative to marijuana uses in general, either retail, recreational, or medical, I would first tell them to go look at our the city's YouTube channel and look at all the marijuana subcommittee sessions, so they can see what those people were talking about, because this issue has been being talked about for over a couple of years now, and in detail on that commission and that subcommittee, in particular over the last year. So there's a lot of information in there about positives and negatives and considerations of impacts and things like that. If somebody were to ask me specifically about this language that we talked about tonight relative to caregiver uses, what I would say is, how do you know that your neighbor isn't growing as a caregiver today? And wouldn't you rather there be some structure and rules around how that's done inside of the city, instead of having it be completely just in denial, like
or the Wild West, where
if you stuck your head in the sand, you don't know it's existing, doesn't mean it's not happening, right?
Right, and it isn't that the purpose to some extent of the public hearing as well. I mean, obviously the public hearing is where they can voice their opinions one way or the other, but we're going to do, at least an explanation up front to explain what it is that we're proposing as an ordinance and why. So, look at some background for that too. So I would also suggest they attend the public hearing.
Exactly. Yeah, because Bruce, before Planning Commission, if I came to a public hearing, I had already come with my mind made up, right, wrong, or indifferent. All right, and that's just the mindset that I had as a resident.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to get ahead of that, so we're not, because I think what we're doing is great. Just my personal opinion, it's just the messaging of it. I don't want it to get lost in translation when the public hearing actually comes about.
You know what, I think I try to write the introductory memo in a way that is helpful to not only for you all to understand, but for anybody to understand the context of the ordinance language. You know, we try to put in some of the pros and cons, the background of it. I know it's not like simple, you know, bullet points that we could put out. Although we can, and I will likely do that for the public hearing, is make a PowerPoint presentation. If I can do that ahead, and then we can post it on the website before the meeting, if that's something that would be helpful.
I think it will, from the standpoint of, at least from what I understand, as far as, you know, primary caregiver facilities, is that they're not something that can be not permitted for our municipality. And so that's I think a strong starting point, or at least part of delivering that message. And I think we rely on Scott to present the legal issues behind, and we rely on Jill for knowledge in assembling the language of the proposed ordinance itself, based on what other communities are doing and what their experience is with this. Which is,
I was just going to add to that. I think that's the big thing to remind residents when they ask about this, is that, you know, this language, this ballot initiative has been around for 12 years now. It's not going away. Whether you like it, you love it, you hate it, marijuana is here. Cannabis is, these facilities are going to be in this state. And so you can do one of two things. You can either get out ahead of them and you can create ordinances that tailor it so that you will end up with the types of businesses that you want in your community, or you can do nothing, roll the dice that maybe individuals won't want to locate in your community. But you also open yourself up to the possibility that they could submit a ballot initiative, which, and I know Jill's been dealing with this in some other communities, where now you no longer have the say in what the conditions are. You're stuck with what the individuals that drafted the ballot initiative, and usually they have a vested interest in those facilities. So you're kind of stuck with that language, and then you don't have an opportunity to fit it to your community. So it's definitely important to get out in front of it, at least in my opinion. And I think that's what we're doing. That's what the city has done. And I think that's the appropriate avenue to take.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things we'll have to likely deal with in this public hearing is the fact that we're talking about this specific facility type. It's not the broader, although I'm sure a broader discussion on facilities in Lathrup is going to enter the picture, or very well could enter the picture. And the goal is going to be to try to, you know, maybe share as much information we have to steer it back to the primary caregiver facilities at hand, which is what's up for discussion.
Yeah, and I think that what we're discussing is that narrative, because, you know, I think just even in the past 7 minutes as we've been discussing this, that the narrative that we've been talking about, kind of abbreviating the discussions that we've had, I think is powerful for residents. I think that, you know, a lot of residents will look at this logically. If the narrative is tight and what we've been discussing makes total sense, you know, I just don't know if the general community kind of understands what we're actually focused on, because it's when you say cannabis, it becomes such a big, you know, field of discussion. And so that was very helpful.
Okay.
Jill, yeah, there's a lot of resources that residents can go to under the marijuana study group. So I don't know if this topic at some point then can be added to that, or maybe direct the residents to that link Jill, just to remind them that we do have that web page.
I actually just
With all
made a
the
note,
background.
Charo, to make sure that I have all of our cannabis ordinance language, make sure that's all online. Kind of in the process of reorganizing anyways, to make sure all of our planning stuff and zoning stuff is here, and make sure that there's cross-reference to the wealth of the materials in the marijuana study group. So
Good.
Same page.
Good.
Yeah, and the software that we approved at, I think the last council meeting should help you with that too, once it gets up and running.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Okay. Other matters for discussion, since that was pretty much linked with what our previous discussion was. If not, we'll move on to legal update.
I guess just real quick, no surprise, and many of you may already know, but the city has been, well, haven't been served, but has been put on notice that JMC Properties, all three of their entities have filed lawsuits against the city. Essentially boils down to they don't want to do what the Planning Commission asked them to do as part of the site plan review. So stay tuned.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. So they came to us, we provided our feedback. They didn't really say anything about that in the session, and now they're suing the city.
It's kind of like putting my toddler to bed.
Okay. Keep us posted. Thanks, Scott.
Okay, thank you for that. Planning update? Something rather, maybe more cheery?
We're going to be doing planning and zoning essentials training with Michigan Association of Planning in March. I think it's the first week in March. It's a 2-night program, and Rod Arroyo is doing one night and I'm doing the other. And I will let you know more details about how to sign up, and you might find it interesting for our newer members, and then some of our longer serving members. I didn't say older members, I said longer serving members. Might find that also to be a good refresher.
That's going to be still online, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's more,
Yeah.
those are more fun when they're in person. But.
Yeah, I attended when I first joined the Planning Commission. I attended a session that was, I think, out in Delta Township, so out west of Lansing, and on a snowy. I think we had a storm coming in on that evening. But anyway, it was a good session. It was a good to get, if you had not been part of the commission very long, or just as a refresher for some of the things that we deal with day to day, but maybe not so day to day or month to month. But because of the the business that comes before us, it's good to get a refresher. So. Right. We'll move on to staff update, if that's it for you, Jill.
That's it.
All right, we'll be really quick. The former Happy's Plaza, the Lathrup Shopping Plaza, they are just about done. There's some little fine tuck pointing things that need to be finished, but they're just about done. So that's exciting. BP, I'm sure you guys have seen lots of action over there. They're digging around in the dirt. They're installing the tanks. So they're moving slowly, but moving. So there's that. And then sneak preview, there's come to the council study session on the 25th. We have a prospective developer that is going to be presenting their proposal to council for the school. And so this could be really awesome. So please attend that study session at 6 p.m. I'll send you guys out a notice.
Yep, thank you for doing that. Yes.
Yeah, the Lathrup Business Plaza looks great.
So
they really did a nice job.
It's going to be even more pretty when it is full of tenants. That will be when it's at its prettiest.
One of their tenants was supposed to be the new burger joint, right? That was going to replace Happy's, and they moved to a different location.
Yes. I know that because I constantly am talking to prospective tenants that they're sending my way. I mean, they're actively marketing the property. I think there may be some interest from our cannabis industry folks in that particular location. So we'll see what ultimately ends up landing there.
Great.
Any updates, Susie, on the drive-through and Panera?
No, as a matter of fact, there is not. I have not heard, and that's one thing I'll add it to my list. Follow up with Blum. We have not spoken at all about Panera. We've talked about all kinds of all their other properties and different users for their other properties, but not Panera. So I'll follow up about that. Oh, and one last thing, DDA is starting Fireside Fridays in February. So we're going to be lighting the pavilion fireplace for lunchtime. It's going to be our answer to the social district. So grab some lunch, come and hang out starting in February. Sorry, that was the last little tangent thing I remember.
Okay.
And Mark, I'll give a real quick infrastructure update. So yeah, we've been working on the roads since the election. So the roads for this summer have been chosen, and we've been moving forward on the design phase for that. And then at the last council meeting, I think on January 4th, which was the special council meeting, council approved the notice of intent for a $5.3 million bond for a variety of infrastructure improvements, water mains, water meters, material lead, water service line material identification, gate valve replacements, fire hydrants, the sanitary sewer tank repairs and upgrades, and several other things that aren't coming to me right now. But there is a town hall meeting tomorrow night at 7:30 virtual. The information's on the website as well as on the Facebook page and the villagers. So we're encouraging residents to attend to find out what that's all about, why we did it, what's included, how it's being paid for, and so forth. So that's tomorrow at 7:30.
That's good. I've fielded one or two questions regarding, probably people are familiar with the road end of things, but not so much on the sanitary and the other infrastructure issues and what that's about. So
right, and that's a big reason of why we started with the roads. One, because people are more familiar with it. We get a lot more complaints about the roads. It's something that they see and they use every day.
and experience, but
yeah, and we had hoped to had gotten to all the other infrastructure systems a year earlier, but we lost the election the first year for the millage, and so we lost a year coming up with the second proposal. But we're excited to get moving on a lot of that stuff. So they're with this proposed bond, between that and the roads, we will have a lot of construction in Lathrup over the next 3 years, doing a lot of improvements that are long overdue. So.
Okay, thanks for that update. So if that's it for staff update, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment. It's been a good, productive meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Okay, I think we know, however, that everyone's in favor at this point of the evening.
Yvette, can you stay on for just a minute?
Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy
Good
Nuggets.
conversation,
Have a
good discussion.
night.
Good
Thank
night,
you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.